Hi, welcome to our Seeing Through Photographs Study Center session. We are so thrilled to be here with Zora Murff, who is the featured artist in Lucy Gallun's companion pieces, New Photography 2020, which is an online exhibition featuring 8 artists, each of whom is featured in a week-by-week basis. So as of yesterday, Zora's article on Magazine was live, and we are just so thrilled that he's tuning in today from Fayetteville, Arkansas. One of the beauties of all of this is that we can actually connect from this distance. So Zora, thank you for joining us. Glad you're here.
Yeah, I'm happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
Hi, Zora.
And Lucy, of course, thank you for joining us too. Thank you for bringing Zora into our lives.
My pleasure. Hi, everyone. Great to be back on another Seeing Through Photographs study session. Sarah, did you just see somebody join?
Sorry, I just glanced at the chat and saw that people are tuning in from Pakistan, Russia, India, Bangalore. I mean, it's great. So we're Germany, Greece, Jerusalem.
Wow.
You know, it's interesting. We normally do this a little bit later in the day. So for Zora, this is pretty early, 9 in the morning, but it's certainly helping our European later time zone attendance. So really welcome all of you. Thank you for using the chat to say where you are. We are really grateful to all of you for joining us. I'll start with a few technical matters just to get them out of the way. This will be recorded. So if you don't want to be a part of that, then I guess sign off. Okay, just kidding. It'll be recorded and we will save it as an unlisted link to our on YouTube and also to Seeing Through Photographs. So if you miss a little part or you want to watch it again, it will be saved. The chat function, as many of you can see, hundreds of you can see, is enabled because we love hearing where you're from. And that's a really great way to connect with one another and just say a comment, especially if you click all panelists and attendees for that. However, the Q&A function is the best way to ask a question, mostly for Zora, but also anything that Lucy or I might be able to answer over the course of our hour together. So please feel free to use the chat function to sort of chat amongst one another, but the Q&A function is the best way to ask a question that we will see, and we will really try to get to everyone's questions. You'll also notice that one of the reasons we were a tiny bit late in starting is that we wanted to get our closed captioning functioning up and running, and that's on the lower right of your Zoom window. So please feel free to turn that on. We have found that sometimes if you're not a native English speaker, we talk a little too fast, and the closed captioning can be helpful with that. So without further ado, thank you all for joining us. Thank you to Lucy, my colleague curator here in the Department of Photography at MoMA, and to Zora Murff in Companion Pieces, New Photography 2020. I thought maybe we'd begin, Lucy, if you'd tell everyone who's gathered a little bit about New Photography 2020 and also what made you so sure that Zora's work needed to be a part of it, and then we'll go on and ask Zora to talk a little bit about his work.
Sure, I'd be happy to. Hi everyone, it's great to be back. I had the pleasure of coming a few weeks ago with Dion Lee, another participant in New Photography. And so for those of you that didn't join then and who haven't had a chance to see the page, there's a page on MoMA.org about Companion Pieces New Photography 2020. It's the latest iteration in the museum's New Photography exhibition series, which has been going on since 1985. All of the artists in the show, their featured in MoMA exhibition programming for the first time. It's wonderful for us to be able to share their work with you in that way. And as Sarah mentioned, we're kind of rolling out the content. So week by week, we get to spend time with the work of one of the 8 artists. And this week, it's Zora. The show really looks at how images talk to one another, the correspondence between images. And that could sometimes be 2 images that might be linked and have a special conversation, or a montage where images are brought together from different times and on different layers. And then, of course, thinking about series of photographs. And, I know that that can be a big topic in thinking about how artists have made bodies of work or photographs work with one another. And it's, we kind of just think of it as intrinsic to the medium almost. And of course, artists also work in book form, and sometimes series are presented that way. So one image coming after another all together in a group. In this case, there's a couple of bodies of work in the exhibition that one would consider series, and Zora's is one of them. When I first encountered this body of work, I was really struck by the types of images in this series. So it's a body of work about a community. We'll hear more from Zora about it, but we see members of the community. We also see images of the landscape itself. So there are different kinds of pictures brought together in a series. And then on top of that, Zora has thought about how other images have informed his own. And there's actually a great book that Zora made with this body of work where his own pictures are in the book together with some found pictures. And some of them are literally placed into the book, and we'll talk about that. But I wanted to think about, obviously other pictures always inform when you're making a new picture, but how did Zora visually do that in his work? And what was his process of collecting pictures and then putting them next to his own pictures? And that was a different way of thinking about series for me and how images talk to one another. So I loved the idea of including this body of work in the show. And now let's hear from Zora. I'm happy to talk more and us, but I'd love to hear more from Zora.
So Zora, we can do this however you like. If you just say next slide, then our amazing AV team will just sort of cue it forward as you're talking. And I should also say, for those of you who aren't aware, is it every single piece that we're projecting now? Well, every single piece of Zora's that we're projecting now is now officially.
Yes, so not the found images that Zora found and are his own, they're objects, but the additioned photographs that you will see in this body of work, unless Zora added a couple of others. No, I think you only added found ones, right? Anyway, we'll see. There are 14 pictures of Zora that are now part of the museum's collection. So.
Yes, you can see Zora now. Anyway, we're just excited because having Zora a part of the museum collection means that not only can we share his work in this context, but we'll be able to feature it in other exhibitions and displays going forward. All right, on to you, Zora. Enough of us.
Well, yeah, thank you for such a generous introduction, and thanks for having me, and yeah, and for collecting the work and everything. I mean, this is like, I don't know. I mean, yeah, it's hard to believe that, we're here, right? And so, yeah, I mean, it's like quickly, I want to thank, first of all, I want to thank my mom. I love you, Mom. And I also want to thank my wife, Raina, who's been a really strong support for me. And, without her, I wouldn't be here today. Yeah, so let's go ahead and get started. So we can go to the next slide. So so I started this work as it was like, well, the body of work itself I presented as my master's thesis, and yeah, so it was 3 years of working, researching this neighborhood, finding all of these histories of anti-Black violence, and then connecting that to the segregation that was endorsed by the U.S. government in the form of redlining. So it's like making all of those connections in the work. But it started, as I was a graduate student, trying to figure out, who I was as an artist. And also, I think more deeply, like figuring out who I was as a person. And especially considering, the circulating images of police violence against Black people, being affected by those images, and having to not only figure out, like, what does it mean for me to exist, like having to question how people see me, whenever I'm in public. And then also, like, again, like trying to figure out who I was as an artist, specifically working with photography, and having to deal with these, kind of justify these images at the same time through that medium. And so I was, going to school at the University of Nebraska in Lincoln. And then I visited North Omaha for the first time, taking a friend to the airport and then driving, on the way back home, trying to find a soul food restaurant, actually. Shout out to Lonell's in North Omaha. Very good food, very great people. But anyway, yeah, like driving through the neighborhood and seeing, Black people. And so, like I was in an environment that was, extremely white. And then to go into North Omaha and be in this space where everyone else looked like me and have my existence validated, without question. I think those are like sort of kind of all of the sort of emotional things that I was grappling with at the time. And so then coming to the histories that exist in Omaha along racial lines. So we have the lynching of Will Brown in 1919, a Black man who was lynched by a white mob. He was accused of raping a white woman and was murdered extrajudicially by the men here in this image. And so, like that piece of history. And then there's another instance, the police murder of Vivian Strong in 1919. So like having like that history, like touch against this history, and then bringing that forward to the police murder of Laquan McDonald, which was the first time that I had decided to watch that type of video. And so seeing this sort of through line between those three instances. And so even though we're separated, throughout time, that all of these moments are connected in this way. And so the work, tries to do that, through, the visual reading of a community, a landscape, social structures, et cetera. We can go to the next slide. Yeah, so this was, again, like an important moment for me and for the work. And so, it was like, this of course wasn't like, the first time that I was made aware of this violence. But that again, I was, I think at the sort of right time in my life to begin asking these deeper questions of like, when this happens, how do we understand this moment? How is it, politicized? How, yeah, like how is, somebody made a martyr and at the same time made a villain? And thinking about, these images supposedly being objective because they're recorded by a machine, understanding like the bias that's already sort of baked in. We can go to the next slide. And then, so, you know, for me, like looking at the previous image and understanding that, you know, that was a moment mediated or negotiated by threat and fear. But maybe we need to ask ourselves, like, who's the threat? You know, whose fear are we talking about in these moments? And then, you know, for me as an artist, you know, how do I sort of visually carry that forward, you know, in my own way that isn't necessarily like, it's not like a visual abstraction, but maybe more of a conceptual abstraction, right? And I mean, so for those of you, like for people who may not be aware, Laquan McDonald was a teenager shot 16 times by a white police officer in Chicago. And he was carrying a knife at the time. And so this, you know, being this sort of like visual reference to that, this, you know, this dark object on this dark background. We can advance, next slide. And then, you know, like, so taking like these larger social issues, and I think for me, again, like trying to figure out my position in that, but then also like how, yeah, like how do we like, you know, connect, how can I connect this experience of watching this video of this young man being murdered to, you know, the murder of a community through legislation, you know, that distended throughout time. And so when
Zora, can I just say one thing, just so people are clear? When we tried to help so that as you're talking through this, we put your images against a white background and the found images that are part of the project against a black background. So for anyone who's watching, that's a good sort of shorthand just to understand, like when you're looking at this is an image that Zora made. And then if you see one against a black background, that's an image that Zora's brought into the project, but that he didn't make. So just as a little point of information.
Yeah, absolutely.
But thank you. Please continue. This is amazing.
And so, you know, I think like having, yeah, like seeing maybe this opportunity through the landscape, and then essentially like when I started the work, having an understanding that I didn't want to make portraits of people because I wasn't from North Omaha, you know, that wasn't my lived experience. And so I think using the landscape as a way to understand this place more deeply, to get to know it better. And then understand, and then like through that sort of study and then through, you know, like the research that I was doing, you know, into these histories, being able to point to things like infrastructure that are used as like the actual implements that do the harm, right? And how those things become so layered and masked and veiled, and that we can't, like, we have a hard time making those connections. Next slide, please. And so, you know, eventually working up to photographing people in the community, but then also like people who didn't live in the community. So this is Rondell. He lives in Lincoln, Nebraska. And I met him one day when I was walking home from my summer job. But yeah, anyway, like, I think to me, it was like, in sort of bringing this body of work together, I think one of the more difficult parts was trying to grapple with this idea of representing North Omaha in a factual way that, like, you know, to me, it like, it was like, it was very clear that I didn't want to create a fictionalized, sort of like this kind of fictionalized zone where it was like talking about the redlining of a community, but maybe I didn't give that place a name. It was important that I named North Omaha specifically in the work, because it's it's real things that have happened, real people that live there. And so I think that, but then also understanding that like it's a very broad history, and so it was like hard to, like, I think maybe like what I'm trying to say, it was hard to deal with like what type of specificity did I want to have in the work. And then it was like, well, maybe I just should stop asking myself that, and I just capture everything, that I'm, sort of experiencing. And that, much in the same way that, there's many red line communities throughout the United States. But then also understanding that, like, there is no like Black experience, quote unquote Black experience, right? But that, like, there are things Black people experience that we all understand. And so I think, to me, like, being like kind of being able to speak broadly and specifically at the same time, was like a really hard thing to learn how to do. But I think that that this work helped me be able to figure that out for myself. Next slide, please. And so then being able to publish the work as a book. So when I started making the work, I felt, or I knew that that it needed to exist as a book. And I would often, like when I was thinking about images or thinking about like, image pairings or relationships, I often would like, make little InDesign books and, like lay images out and move things around. And once I graduated, I, had that like time and mental space to actually sit down and focus on like, okay, if I really want to do this, like, where do I start? And so it's just start doing a serious, layout and sequence. And then, after you get that done, then you start searching for people who might be interested in publishing, and then like navigating those waters. And so, that's kind of what happened my first year out of school. And then, I just got lucky, and, my friend Sean, now friend, at the time, we didn't really know each other, but now really good friend, Sean Bush, he wanted to start this publishing endeavor, start his own imprint, where the kind of the mission of the working relationship is deeply collaborative, and that that all of the books will have like handmade qualities, like made in-house. And so we started I think it was November 2018, and we were on the phone at least like once a week through June 2019. And we pulled together this book, and then his imprint is Deus Books. Anyway, so yeah.
Actually, could we just pause for 1 second? Lucy, do you mind picking it up one more time now that Zora has introduced? And like, you really do
pleasure.
feel, the book feels like a labor of love. In other words, everything from the sort of tactility of the cover, and these things are very hard to, but Lucy,
it's
anyway,
also not a large trim size. It's like very nice to, you can see the plates, but you can really kind of just hold it easily in your hand. It's slightly smaller than you might expect. And yeah, obviously there's Zora's works that are represented
beautifully
for sure. And then also these really important images that
sorry, I just wanted to give a little more pause to that, because I think it's a really nice acknowledgement of like what that collaborative process looks like to make a book like this. And it really does allow you to understand, when you're working as you do with photography, that relationship to specificity is of course at the heart of it. And part of what's so extraordinary about this is that this book and this project, just as you were saying, allows you to understand it both through a space and through these very personal portraits and through images that are related in kind, but that actually stretch all the way back, you know, that sort of implicate history into this. So it's, well, Lucy and I are huge fans, but I guess that's already evident. Okay, please keep going.
Yeah. So yeah, I mean, the book is sold out, and so like I think the advantage of working with Sean was that the day he did, you know, the day I opened the, you know, the mock-up when it was delivered, I was like, this is exactly what I saw. This is what I saw in my head. And I think that it was like he mediated that process really well, because he's a phenomenal designer, but also because he takes the collaboration deeply, like really seriously. Like for him, like, you know, this is like sort of what he wants to do. Like this, he wants this to be his life's work. And so he takes it very seriously. But I think that it was through that level of care and attention that we were able to produce the book. But the downside was, you know, we had a $10,000 budget, and when you're hand making books, you know, that 10,000 goes fast. I think we went over budget, but because we had to do the black foredge, I was pretty, like, I didn't really want to compromise on that. But anyway, Omar, if you could just advance maybe slowly through to the cover of the book, but we can just kind of look through some images, and we can maybe open the discussion up a little bit more.
All right, I was going to allow actually just us to keep going through, but then people are asking if there's no sound. We're just actually just allowing ourselves to be immersed in the experience of looking through this, because it is a precious object. There aren't that many copies that exist. MoMA's library has one. So when if you happen to live in the New York area, and we're, you know, I think there's an effort to try to make sure that lots of libraries do, so that people can have access to it. I posted a few pictures on my Instagram account, which is a poor substitute for the joy of holding the original. But anyway, it is, and Omar, you can keep going. But there have been, oh, okay, great.
There we go. Yeah.
So, and here is the cover with,
I was going to say that last picture of the young man and at his graduation is actually the last one of, yeah, the last pictures. It is. Besides the two pictures that bookend,
Right.
it's the last picture of the book.
Yeah.
And someone asked, will there be a second edition? And I actually wonder the same question. I mean, there has to be enormous interest. Any thoughts about that, Zora?
I mean, well, we'll have to see about that.
Okay. If
Yeah.
anyone would like to subsidize that, they're welcome to chime in on the chat. I'm sure Zora would be very pleased to do it. So we've been actually getting some really great questions, Zora, if you don't mind. Can we turn to a few of those?
Can I ask a question? Oh, you want to go?
Sure.
Oh, no, I saw, well, one of the questions, or it was a comment, which was that I want to hear what each of these portrait subjects is saying. And people might have noticed that Zora has titled the portrait subjects with their name and then talking about whatever it is. And I thought maybe, Zora, you could describe why they're titled that way and what you were talking about in some cases with these portraits.
Yeah, absolutely. Omar, I think if you advance forward, there should be a portrait selected. Yeah.
Yeah, just back one. Thanks, Omar.
Yeah. So the conversation, yeah, like or the way I titled the portraits. To me, it's like negotiating. It was a way of like negotiating like my sort of politics of like making representations of other people and then placing them in these artistic contexts. But I think that folds in, like it folded in nicely with like the subject matter I was talking about to begin with. You know, these moments where, you know, where Black people are made martyrs, and sort of having like this, like, I think it's like, it's important that we, you know, like, you know, we say these names and we project them out into the world. But this idea like that fundamentally, like none of us want to be that person, right? None of us want to serve that role. Like then, like, why does that role like have to even exist, right? And so, you know, thinking about, you know, like when, you know, we say Laquan McDonald, often we're thinking about, you know, like we're thinking about the moment of his death and like what that means in a social context, larger social context. And so like when I was like, you know, sort of considering my relationship to that, or how I was thinking about that, and then considering making portraits of people and then placing them into this context, in a way, kind of doing the same thing, right? But doing it in this way that's talking about someone living, right? We were in that moment together and we were living and we're still living. And then how that extends forward as an argument that throughout all the bullshit that we've been put through, right? We're still here and we're still living, and we will continue to do so. And so, you know, like I was thinking about like the titles and of course having their name present, but then encapsulating like what we were, one of the things that we talked about like in our like, you know, like while we were, you know, while I was making the portrait of them. So yeah, that's how I like sort of thought about and came up with the titles.
But choosing also not to give their last names is a part. Well, how does that factor into it for you?
Mm-hmm. I mean, like sometimes we didn't exchange and get like last names. Sometimes it was like a first name sort of thing. You know, I mean, Terry, like I met Terry. I was actually making a photograph of the freeway. And then I was leaving this apartment complex that like the freeway was behind. And then, yeah, she like, you know, pulled in and she saw that I had my camera and she asked what I was taking pictures of. And we started talking and I was telling her about like the photograph I was making, but then like talking about the work larger, like in a larger sense. She was like, it was her mom's birthday. And that was like, actually the apartment complex was where her mom lived. And she was there to visit her mom. And then like we just, chatted for a bit, and I asked if I could make a portrait of her. And then, yeah, I mean, that was it, right? But we never, yeah, it was just first names, and we we talked, we got to know each other a little bit, and then that was it, right? Yeah.
There have been a few other questions, both about the cover, people wanting to know what's on the cover, what do those markings and design mean? So Omar, can we go back a couple of slides to see that? And then after you talk about that, if you would also please talk about a graduation, which I think is the slide before that one. So there are questions about this.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, if we can either one of those, or multiple questions about both. Your thoughts about a graduation and the cross and that picture, and then also the cover. So which would you prefer to talk about this first, if you don't mind, because it's, well, whichever order.
Yeah, well, I think let's talk about the cover first.
Okay, sorry, one more, Omar, thanks. Forward.
Thanks. Yeah, you're doing a great job, man. Thank you.
I know, it's not easy. Thank you, Omar.
So the book cover, this was I think like one of the ways that Sean like considers design well when making books. And there was like a lot of back and forth about the cover, and I really struggled with the content of it. And so what it is it's from the autopsy report of Laquan McDonald, and the documentation of the entrance and exit wounds on his body. And so, removing the graphic of the body and just having those marks with those numbers. And I think that in that like obliqueness, I think it creates this sort of like sense of like a game or a play. I mean, that's like sort of when I first saw like the graphic removed. Like I thought of like, like football plays, and then I was thinking about like this idea of like games and systems and power and control. And so maybe, it might do that on some level for some people, right? Then there's the people who might be in the know, who know what they're about to walk into, right? But then the fact that like you have to touch the book, and we used this really soft faux leather. And so the sort of discrepancy in that sort of cognitive experience between the sensation, this like thing that's smooth and soft and feels good, right? And so that you yourself have to, like, from the moment you pick this up, you have to begin to kind of rectify those things. And so then on the back cover, it's a similar graphic, but it's the documentation of the exit wounds. And so they're not the same, they're not the exact same. But I think with what when Sean and I talked about this a lot, he would try to get me to really expound upon sort of like what I was thinking emotionally about things. And so, like the scale of the book is meant to be small because it's meant to be an intimate experience. The cover material isn't breathable. It'll pick up your condensation, and your fingerprints actually stay on the cover for a good while afterward. And so there's like all of these really like these subtleties and these nuances. But again, the things that I'm talking about, they've been designed, like in greater and greater ways. So it becomes more and more subtle, the ways in which Black people get oppressed in this country. And so I think it was trying to figure out, how do I operate on that level too? And then does that again create these opportunities for deeper readings into these moments for people who like take the time and care with the work. And then, yeah, we can go forward to go back a slide to the graduation image. And so this being, again, like this tie-in, this moment, so I collect like a lot of visual information, like photographs, but I also collect a lot of other like just things like textures, surfaces, like prints and other stuff. Like, but anyway, like in that act of collecting, it's, you know, typically it's driven by like some sort of like, you know, visual like awareness, or where I see something and then it reminds me of something else. And so this image, you know, it operates on a number of levels, but I think primarily for me, it was like that sort of visual association that it brought me to. And so it's, you know, when Laquan McDonald was murdered, one of the press images that they used was of him graduating. And so, and then the mayor's office, when Rahm Emanuel's administration, when they had to release all of the information publicly surrounding the case, one of the things that they talked about, I believe, was like organizing a rally where people are wearing gowns and mortar boards, like, and then projecting this idea of like Black success. And so there's like, you know, I think that leads us more deeper into like, again, how these moments are politicized, right? You know, I think we talked really a lot about this, like with Trayvon Martin's murder. But then even like, you know, like the social media images and like all of these things, and, you know, like who gets painted or categorized as a, you know, a thug, right? Versus, you know, somebody with promise. And so like, you know, if it functions like in all of these ways, but again, like this archival object, you know, that's like somebody living, right? But then it connects to like that press image of Laquan McDonald. And so like this sort of like memorial or tribute in that way. And then, yeah, like that being like kind of the send off, right? Like that's like the last image that you see. And yeah.
Well, that's there are some other really great questions, so I want to get to those too, but thank you. I mean, I think you're really helping people find a way virtually of having access into this book and its ideas, and it's amazing. There are several questions also about the process of the selection of the images, their order, and also deciding which ones go on one page, which ones are small, which ones are on the other side of the page, and which pages are empty. And so, but I have another follow-up question to this. So they want to know if this is co-working with a designer, your decision. And so talking a little bit more about the scale and the placement and the sequencing. But personally, I would like to expand that question to thinking about the idea of what did this look like as your master's thesis? How does that change in a book context? And then also thinking about how, you know, you and Lucy, and maybe you can both speak to this, how to represent this both online and in exhibition, which we didn't get to physically have, but you both have given a lot of thought to like, not only how you know, take a series and then render it as a book, but then how you take a book and render it as an experience, both physically and online. So maybe if you'd go first, but then I'd also love to hear Lucy talk about that.
Yeah, I mean, quickly, like about just like the image order and the sequence and stuff, you know, like to me, it was like, how do I create these maybe, you know, subtle, you know, like visual connections, like through the process of repetition. And that's like kind of where I started, but I am awful when it comes to like figuring out what's going to be in, what's going to be out, because I get like really emotionally attached to images for no good reason. And so actually, like the initial sequence was made by my wife, Raina. Like we sat down, and she's like a drill sergeant almost, because she will just be like very objective and straightforward and like, why is this here? What does it do? And then if I like kind of waffle or, you know, like try to use the flowery art speak, you know, she's like, not good enough, get it out of here. And so, you know, like
Have no wife will do that.
Yeah, no, I mean, it's like, you got to find your people.
Although I'll also say it's a gift to feel emotionally connected to the photographs you make. So you need both in the world.
Yeah, absolutely. But yeah, I mean, it's good to have like, you know, those people in your life, those people that you can trust, you know, with your work and your ideas. But anyway, yeah, so like that initial sequence that we gave to Sean, you know, she like had like a very large instrumental role in that. Um, yeah, and then we didn't really actually change much. There were like maybe some like alternate images, like, you know, placed here or placed there, but really it was like it didn't get touched a whole lot from the original that we had kind of come up with. But yeah, and then like, you know, showing it as an exhibition, I mean, my master's thesis was an absolute mess, had way too much work in it. I mean, it was a good looking show, don't get me wrong, but it was like, it was just packed, like just every available inch of wall space, there was like something available, because I had a lot of ideas, man. I was trying to get them out. But I think, yeah, to me, I feel like I don't know if I found like the ideal way to present the work in exhibition, but that's just because I haven't had, you know, the opportunities we were hoping like this was going to be, right? But I think I think we were really thinking about like the physical, like the found images, and rather than like, you know, print, you know, making recreations of them, or yeah, like making new prints, actually having the tangible object available, like to see. And I think like maybe that's a way for people, like for viewers to try to find the deeper connections between like, well, what's the difference between this Polaroid versus, you know, this, you know, 32 by 40 inch portrait, right? How do I sort of navigate those two things? Yeah.
Well, I'm glad you believe there's a role for curators in the world, by the way. So maybe Lucy, you'll.
Well, yeah, like Sarah said, we were thinking about how to make this show in a physical space, and due to the circumstances we're all living through right now, this show is online in a different way. Yeah, obviously when you walk into a space and you see that Zora was just describing the scale of some of the images, that's one way of experiencing different objects, that we had to think about something different when we're presenting images on a screen. It's just a totally different way of talking about work. So we just accepted that. We mentioned at the beginning of this conversation that we were able to acquire Zora's work recently into the museum's collection. And that's been something I've been thinking about a lot throughout this whole conversation, is how these images exist as an image, a standalone thing, a photograph on their own. We've been talking so much about this amazing way that Zora has woven them into the book. When the prints are here, you know, Sarah and I got to look at them in person, and it's a different experience. The portraits are very large, and the landscapes are smaller. They're not small, but they're smaller than the portraits. And just having the presence of an individual person is very different when you're seeing one print of that person than it is in experiencing the images in the book. So there's just something to be gained from all of these different ways of experiencing the work. I wanted to just point out these are two images that actually are now in MoMA's collection, but that aren't on Zora's page on magazine, just because there wasn't enough. We couldn't include every picture that Zora had made. But I found this spread. These are two images where related pictures. They're a growth 1 and growth 2 are across the gutter from one another and have a relationship there. But just this, I mean, Zora could say more. We actually haven't spoken much about these, but about my feeling is just these different ways of kind of getting lost in the imagery of, and the pictures are here if we wanted to look at them bigger on the screen. I don't know if Omer can find them. Yeah, but yeah, just those are like two pictures that have more of a direct relationship, 1 and 2 of the same subject, that appear in the book together. And that's just another way that Zora has kind of connected more than one image besides just, you know, this subject to this place or subjects across time. These have this kind of, you're feeling like you're at one level with the growth on this building and then at another level.
Mm-hmm.
I also, the title of this really got to me because it has this sort of optimism. when we're thinking about a city and growth of a population, there's this term progress and growth has this sort of connotation, and the images are so beautiful. But, you know, of course, we're also looking at a building that's been overgrown. And so these layers of different feelings when we're looking at these pictures.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, yeah, for me, it was like, I think like in the moment, I was just like, you know, I was fascinated, you know, of course, by like this vine, you know, overtaking this house. But like, and then I was just trying to find the best angle to take it from, right? And so, you know, like there's one where I'm in the yard that the house exists in. And then the second is, you know, I'm standing on the other in someone else's yard next door and taking it from that vantage point. But I think when I would,
Yeah, I think if you also, when you answer this, someone was asking about how you choose where to stand with your landscape images or your process of finding those spots. So
yeah.
I think if you keep that in mind as you're trying to answer this, that would be it.
Yeah, yeah. Well, yeah. So like, I think, you know, making the work, it was just a lot of like, you know, I would drive up on weekends and photograph, and then but it was, yeah, I would just like, I would drive around the neighborhood, I would stop at places, and then I would just be on foot walking around, and then, you know, go back to the car, you know, drive around some more, you know, just kind of repeating the process. And so, you know, like with this image in particular, or like this house in particular, I just, you know, I think it was just like kind of driving or walking, I can't really remember specifically, but yeah, just remembering seeing the trumpet vine, you know, growing over the house, and the light, you know, was hitting it in, you know, this particular way. And, you know, that was a good photograph to make. But then in the process of looking at everything, considering everything for the book, you know, we talked, or like in the work, I'm talking a lot about time, right? This slow violence of redlining that, you know, we can't see it. We have a hard time naming it because, you know, it starts in 1930, and we really don't start to see like physical results in the landscape until probably like around the 70s, 80s, you know, and forward, right? But anyway, like thinking about like that idea of how do you convey time through an image, right? And so we know that like this, if this is the same building, we know that there's a time sequence. I took one before the other, right? But then also thinking about like one's position or location in a landscape. And then like maybe what do you see from that change in vantage point? Or like, you know, I think for me, I really like this idea of, you know, the image on the right, that's the further away, like that it's like how everything maybe feels like it's growing together. So the visual plane gets confused a little bit. But then also like this idea of like an image masking in some way through its sole visual appearance, or like how somebody makes the photograph. And, you know, maybe no one's going like, you know, that deeply with me, but that's sort of how I was considering it, or think about like that kind of, again, that how can you bring this level of interconnectedness to a collection of photographs.
I think what's so amazing about what you've done today is you've helped us figure out how to go that deeply. So, you know, thank you again. I'm going to ask 3 different questions that I think are related, you know, because we don't have too much time left, but I want to combine them as a way of sort of an invitation to the kinds of things that you might want, that I would be interested in hearing you speak to any of these. So one question is this: Could you expand upon your statement? There is no Black experience, there are many experiences. So with that as a sort of foundational question, but then leading out of that, one other learner asked, your experience is tied to the trauma of Black community, and that has become part of every generation. But do you think there could be a narrative that can exist outside of this experience, a narrative that doesn't come from the harshness of history? Do you feel like as a Black artist, it's asked of you to keep picking up on this narrative? And then again, on the question of Black art, Aaron asks, could you speak to your perspective on the distinguished role of the artist in society and how that has changed during and after, at no point in between? And this person is thinking about specifically how the artist is distinguished from, let's say, a politician or a scientist, and can sort of impact these greater human issues in a unique way. So you don't have to answer all of those, but maybe think, any of those as a point of departure for some closing thoughts. I think we'd all appreciate.
Yeah, I think when I say that there's no Black experience, like there's many experiences, I think it's like, again, something that, like, in making this work, I had to really, like, kind of figure out on my own, because I went to, like, throughout my education, all white professors, majority of the students around me, white. And so then when I, like, try to bring, like, these ideas into the space, there's, like, a lot of pushback, in either silence, because people are, like, afraid of saying the wrong thing, or just don't know what to say, or just don't really care. And then, also, like, this question of, like, having to, like, either, like, having my integrity checked, like, I'm only doing this because I'm Black and I can do it, and no one will ask me questions if I just say, well, it's because I'm Black, right? So, like, this integrity check, or then also, like, this idea of alleviating me of some burden that I'm unaware of, right? And so but, like, inside, like, through all of that, I had to learn why those questions were being asked of me. And it's like, duh, because no one ever asks white people that, right? So they like think that it's an okay question to ask. But then rooted in that is this idea of difference, right? And so I think that, like I think that I don't want people to walk away from this work thinking like this is every Black person's experience, or like this is like the quote unquote like Black experience. Like that's never like what it's about. And to me, it's understanding that, like, or like, I think, and no, this is where I was trying to get to. I talk about the work as an interpersonal archive of my life from 2015 to 2018. And the reason that I do that is because, one, it's genuinely that for me, right? But that it's important to understand that, like, this is just my opinion. This is my take. This is how this is how I'm seeing things. These are the connections throughout history that I see, right? And that for me, I came to all of this because on one night, I decided I was going to watch this video to try to better understand, like, what the fuck is happening in the world. Why is somebody able to shoot somebody 16 times and likely get away with it, right? I was watching, like, and that was the thing, was like, like I'd started paying attention to these things when Michael Brown was murdered. But I was never really deeply invested. I knew that it frustrated me, that it pissed me off, that it saddened me. But I didn't really dig very deeply into it because I was afraid of it, right? And so, like, I decided, okay, like, this happened again. I need to understand this. I'm just going to follow it all the way through from beginning to end. And just to see like what happens and what I learn along the way. And so making this work was a big part of that for me, because to understand that moment for me, I had to dig way back into history. I had to dig, you know, of course, all the way back to 1619, right? But for me, it was like, you know, digging back to 1919, you know, to Will Brown's lynching. And again, sort of asking that question, how is this different? Is it different to me? No, you know, and then looking at the landscape, it's the same thing. It's a violence meant to eradicate Black people. And so we need to start waking up to this and understanding like, yeah, like we're in it, we're in the pool of white supremacy. And now the question is, how do we get out? Right? So yeah, I think that like, I don't know, like, I think I lost the other two questions, but
hey, I couldn't have imagined a better response to all of them. So thank you. You have been incredibly generous with us, and I'm so grateful. There were actually many, many more really fabulous questions, but so I'm sorry we couldn't get to all of them, but I think you gave us a way of understanding this work and your practice that I will keep with me for a long time. So thank you. Lucy, do you have?
Just thank you, Zora. We've learned a lot from you, and for the gift of this work, of sharing it with all of us. It's a privilege and a pleasure.
yeah, thank you so much for everything, and yeah, for you know, creating the space for this opportunity today. My last thing I want to say.
Oh, okay, yes.
Artists, no, it is not your burden. You don't have to make work, and the world is always trying to make you talk about your work in this way, but it's not your burden. You get to make whatever you want. All right, that's it. That's all.
I like that. That's a great way to end.
And of course, this is just one of Zora's bodies of work. He has a new body of work, and you should all.
I had all these questions about other projects where you know, anyway. So we'll just have to have you back if you don't mind.
Yeah, absolutely. I'd love to come back.
Thank you all for joining us today. We really appreciate you being a part of Seeing Through Photographs, and but mainly thank you to Lucy for being everything you are, and Zora, just in the end, really thank you, Zora. And your mom.
Yeah, thank you again, Mom.
All right, bye everyone.